Story number 1. Midnight Vanishings. The old apartment building on 34th Street had always carried an air of mystery, even before the events of that New Year's Eve. Built in the early 1900s, its brick facade was worn by time, and its windows, though recently renovated, still held echoes of the past. It was the kind of place that whispered stories to those who cared to listen, stories of laughter, sorrow, and things best left unspoken. I remember the invitation clearly. It was an elegant card with gold embossing, delivered to my mailbox in late December. "Join us for a New Year's Eve celebration in apartment 12B, it read. The sender was someone I barely knew, a colleague from work named Jonathan Marks. We had shared a few office conversations, nothing more, but the invitation intrigued me. Maybe it was the promise of a grand party in the heart of the city, or perhaps the chance to meet new people before the year turned. Whatever the reason, I decided to attend. As the day of the party approached, I couldn't shake off a growing sense of anticipation mixed with unease. The city was bustling with holiday preparations, but there was something about the invitation that felt different, almost otherworldly. On the evening of December 31st, I found myself standing in front of the imposing building, its entrance adorned with twinkling lights and festive decorations. The lobby was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chilly winter air outside. Jonathan greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Glad you could make it," he said, leading me up the grand staircase to apartment 12B. The hallway was lined with antique lamps that cast a soft glow, and portraits of stern-looking individuals adorned the walls. It felt as though I had stepped back in time. Apartment 12B was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. The room was beautifully decorated for the occasion, elegant tables set with fine china, crystal glasses, and an array of delectable appetizers. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, adding to the sophisticated ambience. The guest list was eclectic, comprising 12 individuals from various walks of life. There was Evelyn, a successful lawyer with a sharp wit, Marcus, a charismatic entrepreneur, Linda, a gentle artist, and others who each brought their unique presence to the gathering. We mingled, shared stories, and enjoyed the evening as the clock in the hallway ticked closer to midnight. As the night progressed, the atmosphere became more lively. Laughter filled the room, glasses clinked in toasts, and the anticipation of the new year built steadily. Around 11:30, Jonathan stood up to address the guests. "Thank you all for coming. Let's raise our glasses to new beginnings and cherished memories." We all followed suit, raising our glasses high. The countdown began, and the excitement was palpable. 10, 9, 8. The voices grew louder, synchronized with the ticking seconds. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year! At that moment, the room erupted in cheers and celebration. Fireworks lit up the night sky, visible through the expansive windows. Music played louder, and we continued to revel in the joyous occasion. It was a perfect start to what we hoped would be a memorable year. But as the clock struck 12, an unexpected stillness fell over the room. The music stopped abruptly, and the laughter faded into an eerie silence. Confused glances were exchanged as the temperature seemed to drop suddenly. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the room was plunged into darkness before the emergency backup lights kicked in, casting long shadows across the walls. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. Jonathan looked around, his expression shifting from joy to concern. I don't know." That was strange. We tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, attributing it to the excitement and the cold night outside. The party resumed, but an undercurrent of tension lingered. Conversations became hushed, and some guests seemed distracted, their eyes darting around the room as if expecting something to happen. As the night wore on, I noticed subtle changes in the apartment. Objects moved slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them, and whispers echoed through the halls, though no one else seemed to hear them. My unease grew, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself it was just the stress of the holiday season. Around 2 in the morning, exhaustion took hold of us all. Guests began to leave, bidding their farewells with warm embraces and promises to stay in touch. I decided to call it a night, thanking Jonathan for his hospitality. As I made my way to the elevator, the hallway felt unnervingly silent, the portraits on the walls seeming to watch my every move. The next morning, the city awoke to the news of a bizarre incident at the old apartment building on 34th Street. 12 people had attended a New Year's Eve party, but when authorities arrived the following morning, apartment 12B was found completely empty. There were no signs of struggle, no personal belongings left behind, and no trace of the guests who had celebrated the night before. The only evidence of their presence was the meticulously set table with untouched wine and appetizers, and a vintage tape recorder left on the mantelpiece, still playing the faint sounds of laughter. Detectives were baffled. How could 12 people vanish without a trace in the heart of a bustling city? The building had been thoroughly searched, yet not a single clue was found. The incident quickly became a local legend, fueling rumors and ghost stories among the residents. Years passed, and the story of the midnight vanishings at apartment 12B became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning about the old building and the mysterious forces that seemed to reside within its walls. I moved away from New York, but the memory of that night never left me. The unanswered questions haunted my dreams and kept me awake on sleepless nights. One evening, nearly a decade later, I found myself back in New York for a business meeting. The city had changed so much, yet some things remained the same. On a whim, I decided to visit the old apartment building on 34th Street. The facade had been renovated, yet it still retained that timeless charm, a blend of old-world elegance and modern sophistication. As I approached the entrance, a chill ran down my spine. The lobby was sleek and contemporary, a far cry from the antique decor of my memory. I inquired about apartment 12B at the front desk, but the receptionist was unfamiliar with the unit, explaining that it had been converted into a luxury penthouse several years ago. Undeterred, I requested access to the apartment. After some persuasion, the receptionist agreed to arrange a tour, curious about my interest in the old building. When I stepped into apartment 12B, the transformation was astonishing. The space was now a lavish penthouse suite, complete with modern furnishings, floor-to-ceiling windows, and state-of-the-art appliances. The untouched party setup from that fateful night was nowhere to be found. I explored the apartment, noting the meticulous design and the absence of any sign of the past gathering. Yet, as I reached the living room, an inexplicable sense of déjà vu washed over me. My eyes were drawn to a corner of the room where an old tape recorder sat on a side table, much like the one from that New Year's Eve party. It was a vintage model, out of place in the modern setting. Compelled by a mixture of curiosity and fear, I approached the tape recorder. It was still warm to the touch, as if recently used. On a hunch, I pressed the play button. The room was filled with the familiar sounds of laughter and clinking glasses, the echoes of a joyous celebration. But as the tape continued, the laughter grew fainter, replaced by a chilling whisper. I froze, recognizing the voice from the original recording, the same whispered warning that had sent shivers down my spine years ago. The message was clear, yet unintelligible to my English ears. It was Vietnamese, a language I barely understood. Translated, it meant, "Be careful, because the new year has just begun." Panic surged through me as the temperature in the room plummeted. The lights flickered, and the shadows seemed to lengthen, twisting into grotesque shapes. The laughter turned into desperate whispers, filling the apartment with a palpable sense of dread. I tried to turn off the tape recorder, but my hands were frozen in place, unable to move. The room began to warp around me, the walls stretching and contorting as if the apartment itself was alive. Ghostly apparitions materialized, their hollow eyes staring into my soul. They were the missing guests, their faces twisted in anguish and fear, forever trapped in a nightmarish loop. The whispers grew louder, repeating the same ominous message over and over. Be careful, because the new year has just begun. Desperate to escape, I struggled to move, my body refusing to respond. The apparitions closed in, their cold presence overwhelming my senses. I could feel their sorrow, their pain, and their unfulfilled longing for release. The realization hit me, I was now part of their eternal cycle, another lost soul trapped within the confines of apartment 12B. Summoning every ounce of willpower, I forced my body to move. With a Herculean effort, I reached out and yanked the tape recorder off the table, breaking it in half. The sound abruptly stopped, and the apparitions vanished, their tormented cries silenced. The temperature returned to normal, and the apartment seemed to revert to its current state. Breathing heavily, I fled the apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. As I descended the grand staircase, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the spirits of that tragic night still lingered, yearning for release. I exited the building, the bright lights of New York City welcoming me back to reality. In the days that followed, I couldn't forget the experience. The tape recorder, the apparitions, the haunting message, they all weighed heavily on my mind. Determined to find answers, I delved into the history of Apartment 12B, uncovering the story of the midnight vanishings. The 12 guests had never been found, their disappearance remaining one of New York's most baffling mysteries. I learned that Jonathan Marks, the host, had been a reclusive figure with a penchant for collecting vintage items and an obsession with the supernatural. Some speculated that he had conducted rituals or experiments that led to the disappearance of his guests, trapping their souls within the apartment. Others believed it was the lingering curse of the building itself, a relic of its haunted past. Regardless of the truth, one thing was clear: the spirits were still restless, their anguish echoing through time. I realized that my encounter was not just a personal nightmare, but a reminder of the thin veil between our world and the unknown. The message in Vietnamese hinted at a deeper connection, a warning that the cycle was not yet complete. As the new year approached once more, I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The shadows seemed to lengthen, and the whispers of the past grew louder in my mind. I knew that the midnight vanishings were not over, that the spirits of Apartment 12B still roamed, seeking closure or perhaps revenge. Determined to break the cycle, I sought out paranormal experts and historians, piecing together the fragmented history of the building and its spectral inhabitants. Through extensive research, I discovered that the original construction of the building was marred by tragedy. Fires, disappearances, and unexplained phenomena had plagued it for decades, creating an environment ripe for restless spirits. One particularly cold evening, armed with newfound knowledge and a resolve to help the lost souls, I returned to Apartment 12B. The penthouse had reverted to its former state, the party remnants still haunting the space. I set up recording equipment, hoping to capture any residual energies or messages from the beyond. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew tense. The clock in the hallway began its countdown, echoing the very moment that had changed my life. 10, 9, 8. The whispers started again, faint but unmistakable. Be careful, because the new year has just begun. Determined to confront the spirits, I addressed them directly. I understand your pain. Let me help you find peace. The room responded immediately. The temperature dropped, and the apparitions materialized once more, their eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. Help us, release us. The whispers pleaded. Guided by ancient rituals and the knowledge I had painstakingly gathered, I began the process of freeing the trapped souls. Candlelight flickered, incense filled the air, and protective symbols were drawn around the room. The spirits watched, their presence both haunting and hopeful. As the clock struck 12, a surge of energy enveloped the apartment. The apparitions reached out, their forms becoming more defined yet simultaneously more ethereal. The air vibrated with an intense power, and the building seemed to shake with the force of their release. One by one, the spirits began to ascend, their forms dissolving into beams of light that pierced the darkness. Their whispers transformed into words of gratitude and farewell. Thank you, free at last. The temperature normalized, and the room filled with a serene calm. The tape recorder, now whole, played a final message: peace has been restored. The new year has begun. Exhausted but relieved, I left the apartment, the weight of the past lifted from my shoulders. The midnight vanishings were no longer a haunting mystery but a story of redemption and closure. The old building on 34th Street stood silent, its dark history finally laid to rest. As I walked through the bustling streets of New York City, the first light of dawn breaking over the skyline, I felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. The spirits had found their release, and the cycle had been broken. The warning had been heeded, and the new year had indeed begun, free from the shadows of the past. But sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the wind whispers through the streets, I can't help but wonder if all is truly settled. If the spirits have found their peace, or if some remnants of their sorrow still linger, waiting for the next lost soul to listen to their whispers. The memory of that night remains a testament to the thin veil between our world and the unknown, a reminder that some stories never truly end, they simply wait for the right moment to be told. Story number 2. Eyes of the Halloween night. The air in Salem was thick with anticipation as Halloween approached. The town, infamous for its dark history of witch trials and eerie legends, seemed to embrace the season with fervor. Every corner, every alleyway, was adorned with jack-o'-lanterns, cobwebs, and skeletal decorations that swayed ominously in the crisp autumn breeze. I had lived here all my life, but each year, Halloween never failed to send shivers down my spine. It was 2005, and I had been invited to one of the most talked-about costume parties in town. The venue was an old Victorian mansion on Chestnut Street, a place that had stood the test of time, its creaky floors and shadowed rooms echoing the whispers of the past. The invitation promised an unforgettable night, and I was eager to experience it firsthand. As I arrived, the mansion loomed before me, its grand facade illuminated by flickering lanterns. Guests in elaborate costumes mingled in the sprawling backyard, laughter and music blending with the sounds of rustling leaves. I had chosen to dress as a classic detective, complete with a trench coat and a fedora, hoping to blend into the crowd seamlessly. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of rooms, each more lavish and mysterious than the last. Chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a warm glow over the ornate furnishings. The scent of spiced cider and roasting chestnuts filled the air, adding to the festive atmosphere. I navigated through groups of people, exchanging pleasantries and admiring the creative costumes around me. Midway through the evening, as the clock neared midnight, a hush seemed to descend upon the party. A live band played haunting melodies, their music creating an eerie yet captivating ambience. It was then that I noticed him, a man dressed as a witch hunter, his face obscured by a meticulously crafted mask. Unlike the other guests, he stood apart, his presence both commanding and unsettling. He moved through the crowd with deliberate steps, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that made me uneasy. No one seemed to recognize him, and when I tried to strike up a conversation, he offered only a curt nod before disappearing into the throng. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to his appearance, something rooted in Salem's dark past. As the night wore on, the festivities reached a fever pitch. Guests indulged in games, danced to the lively tunes, and enjoyed the abundance of food and drink. The mansion was alive with energy, yet an undercurrent of tension lingered, as if the spirits of Salem's history were watching from the shadows. When the clock struck 12, the crowd gathered for the midnight toast. Glasses clinked, and cheers echoed through the grand hall as fireworks began to light up the night sky outside. It was a moment of joy and celebration, a perfect culmination of the night's revelry. But as the excitement faded, a chilling silence enveloped the mansion. I glanced around, noticing that a few guests seemed distracted, their eyes darting nervously towards the grand staircase. My attention was drawn to the dance floor, where the witch hunter stood motionless, his eyes fixed on a group of 4 guests standing nearby. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence. Panic erupted as guests scattered, their festive spirits shattered by fear. I rushed towards the source of the scream, my heart pounding in my chest. The 4 guests were gone, leaving behind nothing but dark, burned handprints smeared across the polished wooden floor. The room erupted into chaos. People frantically searched every corner of the mansion, calling out names and checking rooms, but there was no sign of the missing guests. The only evidence of their presence was the ominous handprints, stark against the elegant wood. The police arrived shortly after, their presence adding to the growing sense of dread. Detectives combed through the mansion, interviewing guests and reviewing the surveillance footage. I found myself among them, recounting my observations of the masked witch hunter. As the footage played, my blood ran cold. There he was, standing in the background, watching the 4 guests intently throughout the evening. Yet, when the footage ended, the man had vanished without a trace. No one remembered seeing him leave, and no one could identify who he was. Days turned into weeks, and the disappearance of the 4 guests became the talk of Salem. Rumors swirled about curses, restless spirits, and the lingering darkness of the town's history. The mansion was closed down, deemed haunted by many, though skeptics dismissed it as a tragic coincidence. But I couldn't let it go. The image of the witch hunter's masked gaze haunted my dreams, and the mystery gnawed at my mind. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved into Salem's archives, poring over old records, newspaper clippings, and folklore. I discovered that the mansion had been the site of numerous unexplained occurrences over the years, each one more sinister than the last. Stories of disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and curses were woven into the fabric of the town's history. One night, as I sifted through a particularly old newspaper, I stumbled upon a chilling account. In 1925, during another Halloween party, a similar incident had occurred. A man dressed as a witch hunter had appeared, and several guests had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only burned handprints. The event had been hushed up, the mansion locked away, but the stories had persisted in whispers and ghost tales. Realizing that history was repeating itself, I knew I had to act. I returned to the mansion, armed with knowledge and a determination to confront whatever force was at play. The building, now abandoned and overgrown with ivy, stood as a silent sentinel to its haunted legacy. I pushed open the creaky front door, stepping into the darkness with only a flashlight to guide me. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and lingering fear. The grand hall was eerily quiet, the remnants of the party long gone. I made my way to the spot where the handprints had been found, examining the scorch marks closely. They seemed almost supernatural, the edges too sharp, the depth too consistent. As I explored further, the atmosphere grew heavier, the temperature dropping noticeably. I could feel eyes watching me, though no one was in sight. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, slow and deliberate. My flashlight flickered, and I saw him, the witch hunter, his masked face staring directly at me. Fear surged through me, but I stood my ground. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond, only continued to watch me with his unblinking eyes. The room around us seemed to warp and twist, the walls closing in as shadows danced menacingly. I realized that the witch hunter was no ordinary man. He was a manifestation of Salem's dark history, a guardian of its cursed legacy. Determined to break the cycle, I searched for a way to appease the spirits. Recalling the stories of old rituals and the power of forgiveness, I decided to perform a cleansing ceremony. I gathered candles, salt, and sacred symbols, setting up a protective circle around me. As I began the incantation, the witch hunter moved closer, his presence growing more oppressive. The air crackled with energy, and the shadows seemed to reach out, trying to pull me into their darkness. I focused on the words, my voice steady despite the fear gripping my heart. The witch hunter halted, watching intently as I continued the ritual. A blinding light enveloped the room, dispelling the shadows and weakening the witch hunter's hold. He faltered, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. I pressed on, pouring every ounce of willpower into the ceremony. The light intensified, and the witch hunter began to dissolve, his masked face contorting in anguish. With a final surge of energy, the light consumed him, and the room fell silent once more. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved, knowing that the spirits of Salem had finally been set free. I left the mansion that night with a newfound respect for the town's history and the lingering spirits that called it home. The mystery of the witch hunter had been unraveled, but the lessons of the past remained etched in my mind. Salem's dark legacy was a reminder that some histories are best left undisturbed, and that the shadows of the past can reach out to claim the present if left unchecked. Years later, the mansion was restored and reopened as a historical site, its haunted reputation softened by the truth behind the legends. The disappearances were acknowledged as part of Salem's complex history, and the witch hunter's story became a tale of redemption rather than fear. Yet, every Halloween, as the town celebrates with costumes and festivities, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see the lingering eyes of the witch hunter watching over Salem once more. The memory of that night remains a testament to the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the enduring power of confronting the darkness that lies within our history. Story number 3. Whispers at Midnight Sanctuary. The dense swamplands of Louisiana have always held a certain mystique, a blend of beauty and menace that's hard to articulate unless you've experienced it firsthand. It was this enigmatic allure that drew me, along with my two friends, Mark and Jenna, to the heart of the state in the summer of 1987. We were a trio of thrill-seekers, united by our fascination with the supernatural and a hunger for adventure that often led us into the unknown. Our destination was Midnight Sanctuary, an abandoned church nestled deep within the labyrinthine woods of the Louisiana Bayou. Once a sanctuary for weary souls seeking refuge, it had a darker history. During the tumultuous years of the Prohibition era, the church had been repurposed as a hideout for a notorious gang of bootleggers. The walls of Midnight Sanctuary had witnessed secrets, whispered deals, and unspeakable acts that left an indelible mark on its very foundation. The local legends surrounding the church were enough to deter most, but for us, they were a siren call. Stories of apparitions, eerie sounds, and the lingering presence of the past made Midnight Sanctuary the perfect site for our exploration. We equipped ourselves with cameras, recording devices, and a sturdy tent, determined to document any paranormal activity. As we trekked through the thick underbrush, the air grew heavy with humidity, and the sounds of the bayou enveloped us. The path was treacherous, winding through tangled vines and hidden sinkholes, but our resolve kept us moving forward. By late afternoon, we reached the outskirts of the church grounds. The structure stood solemnly, its once grand facade now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. The stained glass windows, though shattered, still caught the fading sunlight, casting fragmented patterns onto the moss-covered pews inside. We set up our camp just outside the main entrance, the silhouette of the church looming against the twilight sky. Mark was in charge of the cameras, strategically placing them to cover all possible angles, while Jenna and I busied ourselves with unpacking the recording equipment. The anticipation was palpable, a mix of excitement and trepidation that settled over us like a heavy blanket. As dusk turned to night, we decided to venture inside. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, the sound echoing through the vast, empty nave. Our flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing remnants of a bygone era, tattered hymn books, broken pews, and a massive altar that dominated the front of the church. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay, each breath feeling heavy and oppressive. We began our exploration, moving from room to room, documenting every creak and whisper of the old building. Mark's camera captured fleeting shadows and unexplained flickers of light, while Jenna's recorder picked up soft, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The further we delved, the more the church seemed to come alive, as if the spirits of the past were watching our every move. By midnight, we decided to set up our tent in what used to be the main hall, now a vast, echoing chamber. We pitched the tent quickly, the sounds of the bayou muffled by the thick walls of the church. Inside, we reviewed some of the footage, marveling at the strange occurrences we'd already documented. But as the clock struck 12, an unsettling silence descended upon the church, broken only by the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures. Jenna suggested we take a break, to sit quietly and soak in the atmosphere. Mark and I agreed, and we settled into the makeshift seating area inside the tent. It was then that we heard it, a faint, ragged breathing emanating from somewhere within the church. We exchanged uneasy glances, the hairs on the back of our necks standing on end. "Did you guys hear that?" Jenna whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," Mark replied, his voice barely audible. It sounded like breathing. We sat in stunned silence, the breathing growing louder and more labored, as if someone, or something, was struggling for air. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, our breaths visible in the cold air. The tent shook violently, the sound of footsteps pounding against the wooden floors above us. Panic surged through us as the breathing turned into desperate gasps, followed by a haunting whisper that sent chills down our spines. "Not everyone is allowed to leave." The words echoed through the tent, reverberating in our minds. Mark grabbed his camera, his hands trembling, as Jenna and I huddled together, our hearts racing. We decided it was time to leave, to pack up and escape the malevolent presence that seemed determined to trap us within Midnight Sanctuary. As we made our way out of the tent, the door swung open with a force that sent us stumbling back. The church was no longer silent. The whispers had turned into anguished cries, the air thick with a sense of dread. We rushed towards the exit, but the path seemed to twist and turn, the layout of the church shifting before our eyes. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, the church now a maze of darkness and despair. "Stay close," Mark urged, his voice shaking. "We need to find a way out." But as we navigated the ever-changing interior, it became clear that Midnight Sanctuary had no intention of letting us go. The church seemed to feed off our fear, the walls closing in, the shadows deepening. We stumbled into what appeared to be a basement, the air heavy with the scent of rot and something more sinister. Flickering lights cast grotesque shapes on the walls, and the sound of chanting filled the space, growing louder and more insistent. In the center of the room stood a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence oppressive and commanding. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of heavy breathing. The figure raised its hand, and a blinding light enveloped us, momentarily disorienting us. When our vision cleared, Mark was gone, vanished without a trace. "Mark!" Jenna and I cried, our voices echoing through the empty chamber. But there was no response, only the haunting whisper that lingered in the air. Not everyone is allowed to leave. Fear transformed into desperation as we frantically searched for Mark, but he was nowhere to be found. The figure began to move towards us, its form shifting and contorting, eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. We realized too late that Midnight Sanctuary was not just haunted by the past, it was a living entity, a predator that thrived on the souls it captured. In a final act of terror, Jenna and I fled through the labyrinthine halls, the figure relentlessly pursuing us. The church seemed to twist and morph, trapping us in an inescapable nightmare. Just as we felt ourselves succumbing to the darkness, a surge of adrenaline propelled us towards the exit. We burst through the main doors, the cool night air a stark contrast to the oppressive heat inside. We didn't stop running until we reached the edge of the bayou, our breaths ragged, our bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. We looked back to see Midnight Sanctuary standing silently behind us, the windows like empty, soulless eyes watching our departure. The next morning, authorities arrived, summoned by our frantic calls. We recounted our harrowing experience, but the church seemed to have returned to its original state, no signs of the malevolent presence that had held us captive. Mark was never found, and despite extensive searches, his disappearance remained a mystery. Midnight Sanctuary was immediately sealed off, the authorities deeming it too dangerous to investigate further. Years have passed since that night, but the memory of Midnight Sanctuary remains etched in my mind. The heavy breathing, the desperate whispers, and the anguished cries of a soul trapped within the walls of an abandoned church haunt my dreams. I often wonder what became of Mark, whether he remains lost in the shifting halls, forever ensnared by the darkness that dwells within. The local legends have only grown since our disappearance. New stories emerge each Halloween, tales of lost souls and the vengeful spirits that roam the bayou, ensuring that Midnight Sanctuary's curse continues to claim unsuspecting victims. I try to distance myself from the past, but the whispers at midnight still call to me, a reminder that some places are better left unexplored, and some secrets are meant to stay buried in the shadows of the night. Story number 4. Whispers by Stillwater Lake. The summer of 1976 was supposed to be the best one yet. My friends and I had been planning the trip to Stillwater Lake for months, eager to escape the monotony of high school and the oppressive heat of Montana's plains. Nestled deep within the rugged wilderness, the lake was a hidden gem, surrounded by towering pines and shrouded in local legends that only added to its allure. I was Jake Thompson, a 17-year-old with a penchant for adventure and a curiosity that often led me into places I probably shouldn't have gone. My friends, Tommy, Sarah, Lisa, Mike, and a few others, were all excited for the weekend camping trip. Little did we know, the tranquility of Stillwater Lake held dark secrets that would change our lives forever. We arrived on a Friday afternoon, our old station wagon packed to the brim with gear, food, and enough enthusiasm to rival a pack of wild dogs. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the promise of endless summer nights. As we set up camp near the water's edge, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the shimmering surface of the lake. "Looks perfect," Tommy said, tossing another log onto the fire. The flames crackled and danced, illuminating our eager faces. We spent the evening roasting marshmallows, sharing stories, and laughing until our sides hurt. The night was alive with the sounds of crickets and the occasional splash of water as fish leapt from the depths. As midnight approached, a sense of unease began to settle over us. The sky was clear, and the moon cast a silvery glow across the lake, making everything look almost surreal. Sarah, always the brave one, suggested we take a walk along the shore. "Come on, it'll be fun," she urged, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Reluctantly, the rest of us followed, the warmth of the fire leaving our limbs to succumb to the cool night air. We walked in a loose circle, the only light coming from our flashlights piercing the darkness. The woods around us were eerily silent, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures conspicuously absent. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, watching us with unseen eyes. Guys, do you ever hear about the legend of Stillwater Lake? Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. We exchanged glances, curiosity piqued. You mean the story about the ghostly figure? Mike replied, trying to sound casual. Sarah nodded. Yeah, they say a man named Elias Blackwell used to live here. He was a drifter with a troubled past, and one summer night in the 1950s, he vanished without a trace. Some say his spirit still roams the lake, searching for something he lost. I chuckled nervously, trying to shake off the chill that had settled in my bones. Ghost stories are just that, stories. There's no such thing as restless spirits. But as we continued our walk, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with an unspoken tension. Suddenly, a tall figure appeared at the far end of the shore, partially obscured by the mist rising from the water. He was dressed in a tattered coat, his face hidden beneath the brim of a wide hat. His presence was both captivating and terrifying, sending a shiver down my spine. Did you guys see that? Tommy asked, his voice trembling. Before anyone could respond, the figure began to move towards us, his steps deliberate and slow. We froze, unable to tear our eyes away from the mysterious man. As he drew closer, the details became clearer. His coat was stained and torn, and his eyes, barely visible beneath the hat, held a sorrowful intensity. Who are you? Sarah called out, her voice cracking with fear. The man stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on us. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he raised his hand, pointing towards the center of the lake. Not everyone is allowed to leave, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of the waves. With that, he turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving us stunned and speechless. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of his words pressing down on us. We need to get back, Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. We hurried back to our campsite, the cheerful sounds of the party now replaced by an oppressive silence. As we approached, the fire had died down to embers, casting long, eerie shadows across our tents. Unease gnawed at us, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next morning, we awoke to the sound of chirping birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. Relieved, we gathered our things, ready to leave the haunted serenity of Stillwater Lake behind. But as we packed up, we noticed something odd. 4 of our tents were empty. Panic set in as we searched the area, calling out for our friends, but there was no sign of them. Where did they go? Mike asked, his voice cracking with fear. We retraced our steps, desperate to find any trace of our missing friends. But the only evidence we found were dark, charred handprints smeared across the wooden planks of our campsite, each one distinct and unmistakable. Our cameras had captured everything, we had recorded our entire journey, but there was no sign of any abduction, no footage of the mysterious man we had encountered. The police were called immediately, but their investigation yielded nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints leading away, nothing to explain the disappearance of our friends. The only clue was the footage from our cameras, showing the man in the tattered coat standing by the lake, watching us intently throughout the night. Yet, no one could identify who he was or where he had gone. Days turned into weeks, and the case remained unsolved. Stillwater Lake became a place of fear and speculation, the legend of Elias Blackwell gaining new life with our tragic story. People avoided the area, and the local authorities eventually sealed off the property, deeming it too dangerous to investigate further. Years have passed since that fateful summer, but the memory of that night remains etched in my mind. The image of Elias Blackwell, his sorrowful eyes staring into the depths of the lake, haunts my dreams. I often wonder what became of him, and why he took our friends. Was it revenge, a twisted sense of justice, or something far more sinister? One evening, driven by a mix of guilt and curiosity, I decided to return to Stillwater Lake. The years had softened the harsh edges of the wilderness, but the lake still held an air of mystery, its waters calm and deceptive. I set up my camera, hoping to capture any signs of the supernatural, determined to uncover the truth behind the legend. As night fell, the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. The moon cast a silvery glow over the water, reflecting off the surface like a mirror. I sat by the shore, recording the stillness, the silence broken only by the occasional call of an owl or the distant splash of a fish. Hours passed without incident, and I began to question my decision to return. Just as I was about to pack up, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows, the tall man in the tattered coat. My heart pounded in my chest as I held my breath, watching as he approached the lake. "Not everyone is allowed to leave," he whispered, his voice echoing the memory that had tormented me for years. I tried to speak, to ask him why he was taking our friends, but my voice failed me. The man raised his hand once more, pointing towards the center of the lake. As if obeying an unseen command, the waters began to ripple and churn, dark tendrils of fog rising from the depths. Suddenly, the surface of the lake seemed to come alive, and ghostly figures began to emerge, our missing friends, their faces pale and eyes hollow with fear. They reached out towards us, their hands stretched in a silent plea for help. "No," I whispered, tears streaming down my face as I realized the truth. Elias Blackwell wasn't just a vengeful spirit, he was a guardian of the lake, a twisted protector who ensured that not everyone could leave. Our friends had been claimed by the very place they sought adventure, their souls trapped in the eternal embrace of Stillwater Lake. Desperation clawed at me as I tried to find a way to break the curse. I remembered the stories of old rituals and the power of forgiveness, hoping to offer peace to the tormented souls. Gathering my courage, I began to speak, reciting the incantations I had researched over the years. The air grew thick with energy, and the ghostly figures began to waver, their forms flickering like candles in the wind. Elias Blackwell watched silently, his eyes filled with sorrow and a hint of hope. As I continued the ritual, the water of the lake began to calm, the fog dissipating into the night air. One by one, our friends faded, their anguished cries giving way to a peaceful silence. Elias Blackwell stepped forward, his presence now less menacing and more human. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice tinged with gratitude. "You have freed us." With that, he turned and walked into the depths of the lake, his figure merging with the water until he was nothing more than a shadow beneath the surface. The lake, once a place of fear and tragedy, now felt serene and welcoming, the curse lifted after decades of suffering. I left Stillwater Lake that night with a heavy heart and a sense of closure. The memories of my friends and the haunting presence of Elias Blackwell would forever remain with me, a reminder of the thin line between adventure and the supernatural. The legend of Stillwater Lake would continue to grow, but now it was a story of redemption and the power of one person's determination to bring peace to those lost souls. Years later, I still visit the lake, drawn by a need to remember and honor those who were taken. The waters remain calm, reflecting the beauty of the surrounding wilderness, a stark contrast to the darkness that once plagued it. And sometimes, on quiet summer nights, I can still hear the faint whispers of gratitude carried on the breeze, a testament to the enduring bond between the living and the dead. Stillwater Lake stands as a symbol of both the allure and danger of the unknown, a place where legends are born and lives are forever intertwined with the mysteries that lie beneath the surface. And as I gaze upon its tranquil waters, I am reminded that some places hold secrets too powerful to remain hidden, their stories waiting to be told by those brave enough to seek the truth. Story number 5. Echoes of the Pennsylvania Tunnel. The Pennsylvania Tunnel had always been a place of whispered fears and unspoken legends in our small town of Millersville. Nestled deep within the dense forests that cloaked the outskirts, the tunnel was a relic of a bygone era, a remnant of the once bustling railway line that had been abandoned after the tragic accident of 1943. They said 27 lives were lost that night, swallowed by darkness and steel, their screams echoing through the ages. I'm Ethan Harris, a graduate student in paranormal studies, and I had always been fascinated by the stories surrounding the tunnel. My best friend, Rachel Mitchell, shared the same curiosity. Together, we decided to delve into the heart of the legend, armed with nothing but our research, recording equipment, and an insatiable desire to uncover the truth. It was a chilly October night in 1983 when we set out for our expedition. The moon was a mere sliver in the sky, casting eerie shadows through the towering pines as we made our way to the tunnel's entrance. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a testament to the tunnel's long abandonment. Rachel and I had spent weeks preparing for this night, poring over old newspaper clippings, interviewing locals, and gathering the best equipment we could afford. We had a handheld recorder, several cameras, and a sturdy flashlight. Rachel was to stand guard outside while I ventured into the tunnel, documenting any paranormal activity we might encounter. As we approached the tunnel, the atmosphere grew heavier, the silence almost oppressive. The entrance loomed before us, a dark maw carved into the mountainside, its history etched into every brick and beam. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was it, the moment we had been waiting for. "Are you ready?" Rachel asked, her voice steady but eyes betraying a hint of fear. I nodded, clutching my recorder tightly. "Let's do this." She gave me a reassuring smile before stepping into the shadows, her figure swallowed by the darkness. I followed, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the tunnel walls. The air inside was cold and still, every breath I took visible in the dim light of my flashlight. We had decided to go at midnight, a time when the veil between the living and the dead was believed to be thinnest. As I delved deeper, the tunnel seemed to close in around me, the weight of its history pressing down on my shoulders. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing remnants of the past, rusted tracks, broken wooden planks, and the faint outline of an old signal light. I began setting up my equipment, placing cameras at intervals to capture any movement or unexplained phenomena. The recorder was on, ready to capture the sounds of the night. Hours of research had prepared me for the possibility of encountering something beyond our understanding, but nothing could have fully prepared me for the events that were about to unfold. About 20 minutes into my exploration, a sudden chill swept through the tunnel. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath coming in short, frosty bursts. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. It was then that I heard it, a distant, ear-piercing scream that seemed to reverberate off the walls, followed by the unmistakable sound of a train horn blaring in the darkness. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. The scream was raw and desperate, a sound that felt impossibly real. Then, the screech of metal on metal echoed through the tunnel, followed by the rumble of an unseen train hurtling towards me. Panic surged through me as I turned to run, but the tunnel seemed endless, the path twisting and turning in impossible directions. Rachel's voice crackled through my walkie-talkie. "Ethan, are you okay? We haven't heard from you in a while." I grabbed the device, relief flooding through me. "I'm fine, just hearing some strange noises. I think I need to head back." But as I turned to retrace my steps, the tunnel around me began to shift. The walls twisted and contorted, the tracks beneath my feet warping into impossible angles. The sound of the train grew louder, more imminent, yet there was no sight of it. The screams returned, closer this time, mingling with the deafening roar of the phantom locomotive. Desperation clawed at me as I sprinted down the tunnel, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of burning coal and iron. Every step felt like a struggle against an unseen force, pulling me back towards the heart of the tunnel. The recorder in my pocket vibrated with the intensity of the screams, the whispers of the lost souls echoing in my ears. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber, the ceiling stretching high above me, lost in darkness. The ground was slick with moisture, and the air was heavy with the weight of untold tragedies. In the center of the chamber stood a figure, a tall man in a tattered coat, his face obscured by shadows. His presence was commanding, his eyes hollow with sorrow and rage. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. I backed away, fear paralyzing my limbs. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man took a step forward, his form wavering like a mirage. "I am Elias Blackwell. They took me from this world, left me to wander these tracks forever." His voice was a mournful lament, filled with pain and longing. I felt a deep sadness emanating from him, a sorrow that seemed to seep into my very soul. The screams and the sounds of the train faded, replaced by an eerie silence that enveloped the chamber. "Please," he continued, his voice breaking, "help me find peace." I swallowed hard, realizing that this was more than just a ghost story. Elias Blackwell was a spirit trapped in the tunnel, a victim of the tragedy that had unfolded decades ago. The weight of his suffering pressed down on me, compelling me to help him. "I'll help you," I promised, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. Elias nodded slowly, a flicker of hope in his hollow eyes. "There's a way to release us, but it requires forgiveness and understanding." I searched my memory for the stories I had read, for any clue that could help us move forward. The accident had been a cover-up, a way to hide the truth from the world. I realized that the spirits were trapped not just by the tragedy, but by the unresolved pain and betrayal that had accompanied it. Tell me what I need to do, I said, determined to free him and the others. Elias gestured towards the tracks, now glowing with an ethereal light. We need to acknowledge their suffering, honor their memories, and bring closure to their restless souls. Only then can we find peace. I nodded, understanding the gravity of the task before me. We spent hours working together, performing rituals of remembrance and forgiveness, speaking words of solace to the tormented spirits that lingered in the chamber. As the night wore on, the atmosphere began to change. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and acceptance. One by one, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into beams of light that ascended towards the ceiling. Elias was the last to leave, his form becoming more defined before finally merging with the light. The chamber, once filled with sorrow and despair, now felt peaceful and serene. As dawn broke, the tunnel began to stabilize, the walls no longer shifting, the tracks no longer glowing. I made my way back to the entrance, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the forest. Rachel and the others were waiting outside, their expressions a mix of relief and concern. We found him, I told them, my voice filled with a sense of accomplishment and sadness. We helped him move on. They nodded, understanding the significance of what we had achieved. The legend of the Pennsylvania Tunnel had been more than just a story, it was a testament to the enduring spirit of those who had been lost, and the power of compassion to bring peace to the restless dead. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the memory of our expedition remains vivid in my mind. The Pennsylvania Tunnel stands as a silent guardian, its dark history now tempered by the acts of those who sought to honor the past and heal the wounds of the present. The whispers and screams that once haunted its depths have been silenced, replaced by the quiet rustle of leaves and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I find myself drawn back to Millersville, to the edges of the forest where the tunnel lies. I think of Elias Blackwell and the others we helped find peace, their stories now part of the fabric of the town's history. The Pennsylvania Tunnel, once a place of fear and tragedy, now serves as a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring bond between the living and the dead. And as I gaze into the twilight, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the night sky, I feel a sense of closure, knowing that some of the darkest echoes can be transformed into whispers of hope and remembrance. Story number 6. The Silent Harvest. The sun dipped below the vast Texas horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and crimson, as our family prepared for the annual Thanksgiving gathering at Grandpa's old farm. The place had always been a symbol of togetherness, a retreat from the chaos of city life, nestled deep within the sprawling fields and dense woods of rural Texas. This year was no different, 8 of us, gathered around the long wooden table, sharing stories and laughter, the warmth of the fire contrasting the chill in the autumn air. I'm Michael Carter, the youngest of the family, and that Thanksgiving was meant to be another cherished memory. Grandpa Joe, the patriarch, had meticulously prepared the farm for our visit, ensuring every detail was perfect. The farmhouse, though aging, stood proudly with its weathered facade and creaky porch, surrounded by acres of cornfields and an old barn that held countless family secrets. As dusk settled, we gathered in the dining room, the table laden with turkey, stuffing, and all the trimmings that made Thanksgiving special. The scent of roasted meat mingled with the earthy aroma of the farm, creating an inviting atmosphere. Conversations flowed effortlessly, punctuated by bursts of laughter and the occasional clink of glasses. It was a scene of pure bliss, a moment frozen in time. "Here's to family," Grandpa Joe toasted, his voice strong and steady despite the years etched into his face. We all raised our glasses, the flickering candlelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. The evening continued with stories of past Thanksgivings, each tale more animated than the last, as the night grew deeper and the stars began to twinkle outside the window. Around midnight, after the last of the leftovers had been enjoyed and the fire had dwindled to glowing embers, we decided to call it a night. The children were tucked into their beds upstairs, and the adults retired to their rooms, the farmhouse now enveloped in a serene silence. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, the sounds of the night, crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, lulling me towards sleep. But sleep was elusive, my mind replaying the evening's events like a cherished film. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I drifted into a deep, dreamless slumber. The next morning, I awoke to an unusual stillness. The farmhouse was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt too heavy, too oppressive. I rubbed my eyes and sat up, expecting to see my family scattered around the kitchen, still recovering from the previous night's festivities. Instead, the house was eerily empty. The dining room was undisturbed, the turkey still warm on the table, untouched by anyone's hand. Confusion bubbled within me as I called out for my family, my voice echoing through the silent halls. Mom? Dad? Everyone? My calls went unanswered, the absence of movement unsettling. I descended the stairs cautiously, each step creaking beneath my weight, and entered the kitchen. The scene was identical to the night before, every dish in its place, every utensil neatly arranged. It was as if time had stood still overnight. Panic began to set in as I realized something was terribly wrong. I rushed upstairs, frantically searching each bedroom, but there was no sign of anyone. Desperation clawed at me as I hurried to the living room, where the only source of light was the morning sun streaming through the windows. That's when I noticed it, a message smeared across the wall in dark, congealed stains that looked disturbingly like blood. No one leaves, because he has arrived. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled back, the gravity of the situation sinking in. I grabbed my phone, trying to call my family, but there was no signal. Fear morphed into sheer terror as I realized I was alone in the farmhouse, trapped within its walls. Determined to find answers, I decided to explore the farm, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the mysterious disappearance of my family. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I made my way outside, the sprawling fields now bathed in daylight. But the peaceful scenery belied the horror that had unfolded within the farmhouse. As I walked towards the old barn, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending shivers down my spine. The barn doors, once sturdy and reliable, stood slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I pushed them open, the smell of hay and decay assaulting my senses. Inside, the barn was a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten tools, the remnants of past harvests scattered about. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, eyes lurking in the darkness. My footsteps echoed ominously as I ventured deeper into the barn, flashlight in hand. That's when I saw him, a tall figure clad in a tattered cowboy hat and a ragged coat, his presence both menacing and otherworldly. He stood motionless, staring directly at me through the dusty windows. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear. He didn't respond, only continued to watch me with hollow, unblinking eyes. I took a step back, my mind racing to comprehend what I was witnessing. The air grew colder, and the shadows around me seemed to shift and contort, whispering voices filling the silence. I turned to flee, but the barn doors slammed shut with a force that sent me stumbling forward. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the doors, shouting for help, but my cries were swallowed by the darkness. The tall man began to move towards me, his footsteps silent yet powerful, each step sending chills down my spine. Desperate to escape, I searched the barn for any means of exit, my flashlight flickering ominously. I found an old window partially obscured by hay bales and struggled to open it, finally breaking free from the barn's oppressive confines. I ran back towards the farmhouse, my heart racing as the tall man's presence loomed behind me. As I approached the house, the front doors swung open on their own, revealing the same blood-streaked message that had greeted me earlier. The farmhouse seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, the walls closing in around me. I sprinted towards the road, but the field stretched endlessly, the path back to civilization obscured by the dense wilderness. Hours turned into days as I wandered the desolate landscape, the farmhouse a distant memory now overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of the unknown entity that sought to keep me trapped. The only solace was the occasional glimpse of the tall man in the cowboy hat, his silhouette a constant reminder of the horror I had escaped. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small town, the people wary and fearful of my presence. I relayed my story to the authorities, but they dismissed it as a product of stress and exhaustion. The farm was searched extensively, but no traces of my family or the mysterious figure were ever found. The farmhouse remained abandoned, locked from within, its dark secrets sealed away from the world. Years have passed since that fateful Thanksgiving, but the memory of that night remains etched in my mind. The tall man in the cowboy hat is a constant presence in my nightmares, his hollow eyes staring into my soul, reminding me that some places hold onto their tragedies with a vengeance that defies explanation. The blood-streaked message on the wall serves as a chilling reminder of the night I lost my family and faced the darkness that lurks in the heart of Texas. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I find myself drawn to the old farmhouse, standing on the outskirts of town, staring into the night. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying with it the faint echoes of that horrific night. I can almost hear the desperate cries of my family, forever trapped within the walls of the silent harvest, unable to escape the clutches of the entity that claimed them. The legend of the silent harvest continues to grow, a cautionary tale told around campfires and in hushed tones, warning of the darkness that can descend upon even the most cherished of gatherings. And as I reflect on those terrifying events, I realize that some curses are eternal, bound to the land and the souls that inhabit it, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to heed their silent call.